Hi everybody, Sapora here, and in this section we're going to dive into life. Why not? We're in biology class, so I figure it's about time we started looking at what it means to be a living thing and what living things are made of, at least here on Earth. So that brings us to the next topic. What exactly is life? So what does it mean to be alive? And what does it mean to be a living thing here on Earth? Okay. Currently, there are 2 rovers that we have on Mars, little robots that are cruising around and looking for either signs of ancient life, things like fossils, right? Big and small, right? There's tiny little shells inside this one. They're microscopic, and then there's big ones. And also it's looking for life forms that might exist there currently today, right? Obviously, there's no elephants or triceratops or anything like that on Mars, but there could be tiny little microbial things like lichens or molds or bacteria, right? And sometimes living things, well, they don't always look like the obvious, right? They don't always look like something that we would recognize swimming by you, right? They might be oddly shaped, and you might just cruise right by it without even noticing that it was a living thing in the first place. In fact, most living things don't look like us. They don't have eyes and ears and a head and arms and legs, right? Most living things are kind of different. That's how I'll put it there. We're going to dive into it here. So the first assignment I have for you guys before we even start taking notes is I want you to go out and just do a little activity investigation. Go outside. Yeah, right? Go outside and find and identify and describe 3 different things that you consider to be alive and living. Okay, you might find that easy. Hopefully you do. And then find 3 things that you would consider to not be alive, not living. And these can't be things that were once living. So I don't want you to bring in a dead cat. Okay, it has to be something that has truly never been alive. So what are 3 different things that are not alive? What are 3 things that are alive, right? 2 distinct categories. And then I want you to find at least one thing that you're unsure of. Is this thing living? Is it not living, right? So bring in that sort of unknown. And where are you going to bring it? Well, you're going to bring it to class or virtual class, however we do it, and bring it to a class meeting and be ready to share a couple of those things, be able to describe in detail why you think it's alive or why you don't think or think it's not alive. And if you can't make it to a class meeting, then I have a table that I have set up for you, and you can fill it in here with all of your objects, 3 things that are living, 3 that are not living, and 1 thing you're unsure of, and then write your description of why you think it's alive in detail in the alive box or the not alive box, depending on what you think, or in the I don't know box there, and you can turn that in. But again, you can get full points just for showing up to the class meeting and discussing it there, and then you don't have to do the paperwork. Win-win. Okay, so let's get into this of what is alive. Oh, here's me holding a bird. Don't bring in an actual live bird that you caught outside, though. You're not supposed to do that. Okay. Yes, we will do that in class. Okay, so this is the part where we start taking notes. Get ready. Let's go. So scientists here on Earth have come up with 6 different characteristics that we use to say that something is alive. To be alive, you have to have kind of all 6 of these check boxes. And when we're looking for life on another planet, these are the things that we're looking for there as well, right? To see if something is alive. So what makes this, again, a living thing and this not a living thing? Well, this thing has 6 of these characteristics that this does not have, right? Okay. And it's kind of interesting when you think about things like this because, again, this doesn't have a head or arms and legs, right? But this is obviously a living thing. This is also a living thing. So what does this thing have? The sweet baby Cletus is missing. Sweet baby Cletus is actually not alive, although he would argue that he is. But I'm not going to do that right now. Okay. Let's go. So what do you think this is a picture of here? I know. Talking to you like this is a class because, hey, it is. What are we showing here? One of the main characteristics of life is that all living things are made of these basic building blocks of life. This thing here is made of these things, and this thing here isn't made of these things. Sweet baby Cletus isn't made of those things. It's made of plastic. All living things are made of cells. So, one of the characteristics of life, at least here on Earth as we know it, and it may be different if we find it somewhere else, is that all things are made of cells, and cells here on Earth all have 4 basic things that they share in common. All cells here on Earth have DNA or RNA, some type of informational molecule. They have a cell membrane, the skin that goes around the cell. They have a cytoplasm, which is the juice inside the cell, basically. And then cells here on Earth, they have proteins. DNA codes for proteins, and proteins are the little molecules of life that do all the work. They make up, our bodies and our skin and our hair and stuff, but they also do all the little jobs that cells need to do to run metabolisms and run life. Okay, and cells are, the way we say this is that cells are the smallest unit of structure, meaning what things are made of, living things, and they're the smallest unit of function. They do things, right? They have specific jobs. And the more complicated you are, the more types of cells you have, the more different types of jobs that your body does and has to do. A carrot only has a few types of cells, but it still, has a handful of different cell types, and they do different types of jobs. For instance, the root does different things than the stem and the leaves do. And as humans, we have many different types of cells that do all kinds of different things. And we'll jump into that later on. Okay, so that's the first characteristic of life here on Earth. And humans are made of around 37 trillion cells. And let's actually do a little virtual microscope activity here and jump in and take a look. I have a link to this on the presentation, so feel free to jump in there. And so this is kind of taking a cross-section of you and looking at you. And we're looking at your mouth, and this would be your trachea that goes into your lungs. And we can jump in there, and we can even turn labels on and label all the different parts, but we're not really going to focus too much of that. Now we're going to zoom in and look at the trachea. So if we zoom in on the trachea, looking down it like a cross section now, you can see all these different types of tissues in there that make that up. Some are muscle, some are connective, things like that. And then those are made up of different types of cells. We can zoom in even closer and look down at just the surface layer of the trachea. You can see that these cells right in here actually have little protein projections on them called cilia, and they help move things up and down. Right? So when you cough up stuff, these little cilia are the things moving them around. And we can zoom in on those cells there and actually see a single cell. So there's the actual single cell with the nucleus and all the cell parts for us. We're all made of cells. Right? Anything smaller than a cell is no longer considered a living thing. It's the parts, but it's not the thing itself. Just like a wheel is not a car, right? You need all the parts of it to make the actual thing that does the job. A wheel by itself doesn't do anything because it needs to turn something else, right? So there you go. And then you jump out, and there's all the little cells making up part of that tissue. And then you jump out, and then you've got the bigger organ itself. And then you jump out from that, and you have the organism, you. All living things are made of cells. Let's keep going. Another characteristic of life is that all living things here on Earth require and use energy and need a source of energy. Okay? So in order to grow, reproduce, carry on life processes, all living organisms need energy. So we learned about in ecology, producers produce their own energy by converting the sun's energy into chemical sugar energy and into their bodies, into their structures. This tree that you're looking at, this redwood tree, the tallest living organism on Earth, their entire body is made out of carbon that they've pulled out of the atmosphere and stitched together into cellulose, into fibers, into wood through photosynthesis. And then they consume their own sugar that they make as well for their metabolism. Now, the source of energy, the ultimate source of energy on this planet is, of course, the sun. Right? We live on a solar powered planet. Do you like that animation I did there? I'm going to back that up so you can see that again. The sun. Boop. Okay, so autotrophs, primary producers, do photosynthesis, and they're the ones that first capture that physical energy and turn it into chemical energy, and then you get those food webs, right? Those energy pyramids. And this bird right here is an Arctic tern. I took this up in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge of Alaska. They have the longest migration of any animal on the planet. They fly from Antarctica all the way up from the South Pole to the North Pole, and then back again every year. And they do that following the sun. They're following the tilt of the Earth and the sun, and they're following that flow of energy back and forth across the planet, which is pretty cool to think Okay, and this is just a map that shows you the most productive ecosystems and regions on Earth where you get the most production of glucose and photosynthesis. So here, it's right across the equator in the middle here. You get the tropical jungles, and there's 3 main tropical jungle regions on Earth. There's the Amazon Basin, the largest, and then there's the Indonesian rainforest here that go through New Guinea, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Bunch of islands basically, but this is a huge rainforest area. And then the Congo Basin in Africa is the other big tropical rainforest. The most productive places on land. In the ocean, the most productive places are actually near the poles, and it's the light blue waters that you see here that are the most productive, where the most plankton is produced and the most biomass. And then up in the north, in the tundra regions, and then the temperate rainforest where we are as well, and then some hardwood forest over here. So most production on the planet is where those abiotic factors all line up and where there's a lot of good sunlight, at least for part of the year as well. Okay. The other characteristic of life. So we have all living things are made of cells. We have all living things require and need a source of energy. And then the other characteristic that we have, what do you think this picture is all living things, Q. Oh yeah, there I got a little graphic there. Boop. All living things has DNA and evolves have DNA. Life, living things, they have DNA. And living populations of organisms evolve over time and change. That's why we have the diversity that we have on the planet, and it's why when we look back, we see all the different types of life forms that have existed throughout the Earth's history as well. And DNA is really central to life here on Earth. One of the first questions we have if we find anything alive on another planet is, does it have DNA? And is its DNA structured like ours? And we're going to get into DNA next. But DNA is a pretty simple structure, and every living thing on Earth has DNA, and that DNA is structured in the same way. We all share that same basic code, right? We all have the same blueprint. We all have the same foundational biology. And so does life on another planet have that same blueprint, or is it slightly different, right? And even that would be huge. So the cells of living things contain the DNA molecule, deoxyribonucleic acid. We'll learn about that next. And DNA controls the structure, what cells look like, and the function, what they do of cells. So DNA really is the instruction, the computer inside of all cells that tells them what to do and what to be and how to do it and all of that. It is the brain. And DNA is also used to pass on traits to the next generation to make new cells. So it's essential to life, and all living things here on Earth have DNA in some form or another, which is pretty cool stuff. And as we get into later in biology, over time, the populations of organisms, population being a group, right? Like we're all a population. Over time, our DNA slightly changes. The DNA of the average human being here on Earth 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, would be slightly different than it is today, right? Because new little things pop up, mutations happen, and people die, right? And so some people pass on their DNA, some don't. Some traits get passed on more than others. Then we combine, right, our traits and stuff when we reproduce and mate. And so what the DNA landscape looks like, just like as people, we all look a little slightly different. Traits change and evolve over time. And over long periods of time, we see a lot of change. We can look at that with whales over time. Where whales came from 55 million years ago to where they are today is very different. And we can see that on islands around the planet, etc. But all living things share that DNA code, and that DNA code is the language of what cells are and do. And it allows us to change as well. And we'll get more into this, but this is just the whole tree of life, all living things, and how they're connected genetically through DNA. And this was done in 2008, doing the first genomic sequences and really mapping all of life here on Earth. And so this is new stuff. It's cool stuff. New to my lifetime. What am I doing? What are we talking about? Why am I burning? This is an Elmo. I'm not sure which one this is. He's burning. Why? All living things do this. That's what I'm talking about in this picture here. Help brother out. I'm burning. Sweet baby Cletus. You don't have to, right? This could be you. Okay, so all living things. Come on, people. They respond to their environment. They respond to stimulus or stimuli, if you want to sound fancy. So all living things sense changes in their environment and respond to it. We are big living things, right? We're lots of cells put together. Not all living things are as big and complex as we are. So but think about how you respond to living things. If you reach out and touch a hot pan, you naturally go, wow, your hand pulls away. That's a very instinctual thing. Those are your cells telling you, stop, move away from that. We're going to get damaged and destroyed. We also respond chemically. Have you ever heard a loud noise or been really startled and all of a sudden you get that adrenaline just pumping through your body? Right? It's that fight or flight response. I could slam a book down on a table if you were sitting there and you didn't see me doing it right behind you, and you would jump out of your chair. Your hair would stand up on end, your eyes would dilate, you would feel different because you would be biologically behaving differently. A hormone gets released in your body when that happens, and it's called adrenaline. And you have two of these glands, adrenal glands, meaning they're on top of your kidneys. Your renal glands are your kidneys. Ad means on top. So they are on top of your kidneys, and they're full of these hormones. They make them, and then they store them. And when you get startled, they dump it into your kidneys, and that goes straight into your blood system instantly. And within a few seconds, all of your tissues are saturated in this adrenaline hormone. And it causes you to breathe deeply. It causes your eyes to dilate so you can take in more light. It causes your muscles to fill up with oxygen quickly, and it stops oxygen from going to other organs like your stomach for digestion. So it causes all these responses. That's a chemical response to your environment. And those are responses that you can't really control. Right? Anxiety is one of those things too. You can do things to limit your exposure to that stress. But once you're stressed in that way, your body will respond in a certain way to that. You feel me there? So these stimuli, right, the things that cause this response, they can be, physical things, but they can also be chemicals. They can be lights and sounds. They can be hunger. You smell something and all of a sudden you start to salivate or your mouth starts to water. That is a chemical response to your environment. Again, you're not in control of that. Interesting, cool stuff. All living things do this. Even in a petri dish, we could do it with single-celled things. We could change the chemistry of the water on one side of the dish or the other, and you'd watch the organisms move towards the favored environment. So things respond. And I changed the font on that one. Cool. Okay, another characteristic of life, so now we're up to 5, I think, is living things grow and reproduce. So we've got made of cells. We've got use energy. We have, all living things have DNA. All living things respond to their environment. And another thing that living things do is they grow and reproduce. If I'm on Mars driving around and looking for a living thing, one of the differences between this rock and this carrot is that this rock could sit here and has for millions and millions of years. This is actually 200 million year old metamorphic seafloor rock from southern Oregon. Right. Now it's been rolled around and moved, but it's 200 million years old. This carrot's not that old. This carrot has relatives or ancestors that go back that far, I guess. Because this grows and reproduces. This will not live forever. But I could stick this in the ground and come back and there might be 10 carrots in a month. If I stick this rock in the ground, it's just going to be that rock in the ground. It's not going to grow. It's not going to reproduce. It's not a living thing. Living things grow and reproduce, and their cells grow and reproduce. So all living things need in some way to reproduce, and they reproduce in 2 ways. Either asexually, which is cloning. So plants do this all the time, right? I could take this carrot and slice it in half and put it in 2 different pots, and I'd get 2 carrots. You can break off stems and do this. Plants reproduce asexually. Bacteria reproduce asexually. They just divide and make more and more and more. And even some animals do this as well. Members of the Cnidaria group, which is corals and anemones, they can bud off and reproduce asexually. There are many sea anemones that do this, and they'll cover an entire tide pool area, and they're really just one kind of cloned out organism. We don't do that, and a lot of animals and plants have gone for a second option, and that is sexual reproduction. You combine the genetic information from 2 individuals, and then the offspring is similar, but genetically unique from its parents. You're similar to your parents. You have traits of both of them, but you are a genetically unique individual. And what that allows in the environment is it allows for that variation. So it allows for things to adapt to changes in the environment. It allows, again, talking about evolution, populations to change over time due to changes in their environment. It also allows for that genetic diversity. If an illness comes through, as we're seeing now, some people might be more susceptible than others, but some people might be very resistant. If everybody was the same, as in asexual reproduction, everybody, if they were susceptible, would get sick and die. And so that genetic variability allows for adaptability, and the Earth changes over time. Our climates change over time, the landscapes change over time, and life has changed in a response to that, and life will continue to change slowly in responses to that. So as long as the changes aren't too fast, then things go extinct, as we saw with the dinosaur video. Okay, last one. I'm going to wrap this up. Characteristics of life. Boom. What are we talking about here? Two different things going on here. Two extremes, right? Obviously, the person on the right is doing what? They're shivering. And when you shiver, it's uncontrollable. Your body starts to do it. Your teeth start to chatter. Why do you shiver? You shiver when you get cold, but why? And the why part comes from your body trying to warm itself up. If your body gets too cold, your little cells down here will freeze. The liquid, the cytoplasm inside of them will freeze, and they will break, and you will die, right? Especially if they are brain cells or some of your more important organs, right? Hypothermia can end in death, and frostbite can end in tissues being destroyed. So our body starts to do this to warm up. Each one of your little cells inside there is literally doing this, and that's what shivering is. Everything is rubbing together. Do this. It's fun. Feels good. Okay. So you're creating frictional heat. You're using energy to do that. In the opposite case, this rabbit here, actually these jackrabbits, desert jackrabbits, notice the large veins in their ears. They use their ears to cool down like radiators. The blood inside their body gets hot, especially in the middle of the day, and they start to overheat. And just like you can freeze a cell to death, you can boil it to death. And then it will denature and break apart. The bonds will break, and it will denature and right, the organism will die. Some organisms can handle higher temperatures than others, but there's always a limit. And this jackrabbit is close to reaching theirs, so they put blood up through their ears, and the wind cools down the blood a little bit, and then it goes back into their body and runs around. Their ears act like a radiator in a car, where everything goes through that thin area, and the fan blows on it, and it cools it down, so that as it goes through the engine, it doesn't reach a boiling point. Yeah, I know something about cars. This process in life is a big word. Let's all say it together. Homeostasis. Repeat after me. Homeostasis. Stasis. Good job. Homeo or homo means same, and stasis means state. The same state, the same condition. Your cells want to stay the same on the inside. They don't want to get too hot. They don't want to get too cold. They want to be right down the middle. They want to have a stable internal environment. They don't want to get too salty. They don't want to get too fresh water, right? So your body does these things always to balance out. And all living things do this to balance out. So they maintain a separate internal state than an external environment. It's why you can go outside in 50-degree weather and your body doesn't drop to 50 degrees instantly, right? Because we can regulate our own temperature through metabolism. That's why you have to dress right, or you have to eat enough. If you work out in a cold environment and you're working all day, you have to eat a lot of food. You burn through calories. When I was working as a scuba diver in Thailand, I would be in the water, underwater, sometimes for at least 2 to 3 hours a day, submerged underwater, and you burn a ton of calories because water really steals your heat. So even though it was tropical, I was cold a lot of the time, and I ate a ton of food, and I was still super skinny. Like, it was hard to even put on weight there when you're in the water. My body was constantly trying to maintain homeostasis and working really hard. So you do chemical and you do mechanical actions to regulate your temperature. That's why you get fevers, and why you sweat when you get a fever, to cool your body down, and all these things happen. Living things do this. Okay, so let's put it all together now. We have all 6 things, right? We have all living things are made of cells. We have all living things need and use and require energy. We have all living things have DNA. And those are really the big 3, right? That's like what stuff is and does. Then we have living things respond to their environment. Okay? So they will have some type of response, and scientists can test this and measure this. We have living things reproduce and grow. So growth is part of being a living thing. You've grown. You all started out as one tiny, tiny, tiny cell, which is crazy to think about. And now you are 37 trillion cells, right? But you're not going to live forever. So then to pass on that torch of life, you reproduce and have kids eventually, way in the future, and they carry on your DNA, but slightly different, blah, blah, blah. And throughout your lifetime, in order to stay alive, you maintain homeostasis. Right? You don't get too hot. You don't get too cold. You keep your cells in good condition, and you feed them what you need to feed them, right, to keep them healthy. All of this, all 6 of these combine to make something up. Make up living things here on Earth. And there are so many weird and crazy types of living things here on Earth. Currently, we have identified at least 7 million or 8.4 or whatever. We've named 1 million, over 1 million now. And we estimate there's at least 10 to 100 million different types of living things here on Earth. And most of that 10 to 100 million don't look anything like you. They look like this. And this is what we're looking for on other planets. Squishy, squishy things. This is in Yellowstone Park, bottom left, Grand Prismatic, and it is a huge hot spring. In fact, at the bottom is a walkway with a person on it, and you can see this. The colors are made up of these tiny microbes called archaea or archaebacteria. They're related to bacteria. They're single-celled. They have a lot of characteristics along with them, and they are incredibly tiny. You can only see them with the highest powered microscopes out there. Here's a scanning electron microscope image of them. Each color represents a different type of bacteria. So it's hotter in the middle, so the blue ones live there. Then there's a band of yellow archaea, and then there's an orange band of archaea on the outside. These are living things here on Earth, and they have all 6 of those characteristics that we've talked about. They're made of cells. They use energy, right? These guys actually do photosynthesis. They have DNA. Okay? They grow and reproduce constantly. They respond to their environment. Right? There are different species at different areas in here in response to those different temperatures, and they maintain homeostasis. They maintain a stable internal condition, and they pass that on to the next generation. Here's a bunch more crazy single-celled things you can find in water. Again, most of the estimated 10 to 100 million different types of things look like this. And then we got the big things, right? The biggest animal on the planet, the blue whale. Big, large, complicated, multicellular things. But all of these things share all 6 of those traits. And we are more alike than we are different when it comes to our biology. And that is pretty fascinating. As we jump into and look at cells and look at DNA, we're really going to discover how alike we all are here on this planet and all the things that we share in common. And I think that's pretty rad. All 6 of these things make up the individual living thing. And this is the last piece here, the organism. A living organism. What makes an organism? Well, you're made of cells, right? You have DNA, on and on. This is what makes up a living thing here on Earth. So an organism is the single individual living unit. Right? It's not the part, it's the whole thing. So again, a wheel is not a car, right? It's a part of a car, but you have to have all 6 of those characteristics to be the living thing, an organism. An organism comes from the Latin term organization. Duh. So we're organized. We're put together in a way that when you look, there's structure, there's jobs that things do, and life looks organized. And the smallest, of course, is a single-celled organism, a single cell. But the largest are multi-celled and up to hundreds of trillions of cells. Let's take a look, actually, at the size of some of these things real quick, and then we're done. So single-celled is one cell, an individual made of one cell. And there are many, many types of these here on Earth. There's bacteria and archaea, like we just talked about. There are plankton, diatoms in the oceans. There's these little euglena, single-celled things that live in fresh water, that do photosynthesis and swim around. And then there's all the multi-celled things made of many cells. And there's tons of groups of those, right? Animals, plants, fungus, and even algae as well are in their own group. And these things have tissues, and tissues make up organs, and organs make up the organism. And there's all kinds of varieties of these on land and in the ocean. Well, let's take a look at how big we're talking about here. So if we are to zoom in here on something that we see every day, things that are on the table around me right now, coffee beans, grains of rice, these are already magnified. How big is a cell? Can you even see a cell here? The largest single-celled thing there is an amoeba. We're going to zoom in, and there it is right there. The largest single-celled thing there is, right? You're made of 37 trillion cells, and you can look down and see, right, the structure, but you can't really see the thing. Similar to as if you're in an airplane and you can see a beach down below. You see the beach, but you can't see the grains of sand. That's like your skin. You have to zoom in. You have to use a microscope, just like you'd have to get out of the airplane, get down on your hands and knees, and look at the sand. So that's what we're doing here. We're zooming in an amoeba. Then a paramecium. This is a single-celled thing that lives in water. A human egg. All of us started out as this big. Right here. That. Boom. You can't even see it with your eye. You have to use a microscope. And then a skin cell. This is what your skin is made of. And then we get into some of the parts of cells. We get into some large proteins like you have in your eyes. Or red blood cells, tinier cells, or chromosomes inside larger cells. Inside an egg, for instance. There would be a chromosome in there. A bunch of them. Mitochondria. And then finally bacteria. The smallest single-celled things are about this big right here at bacteria. And bacteria are tiny compared to our cells. And in honors, we're going to learn about that. If we want to zoom way in again, we have an amoeba, a skin cell, a bacteria, and then finally viruses. We'll talk about those later. Technically not alive, but kind of weird. And then we get into proteins, fats, and then sugars, and then finally atoms themselves, the smallest things of matter that are out there, a carbon atom. And we're made up of trillions of those. Life. It's pretty fascinating stuff, pretty cool stuff. All right, so what you have to do now is do the activity we talked about. Hopefully you've already done that. And then fill out the first page for general biology of this note sheet. And then honors biology, we're going to have a second video. And there's a second side to this. So use your notes to fill out this note sheet. List and describe the different characteristics. Come up with examples. So in here, you would, which of the characteristics applies to this situation? Is it made of cells? Uses energy? DNA? Reproduces? So apply each of those to the scenarios I've provided. And there's 6 characteristics, so I have different ones. And then down here, you come up with your own example. List the characteristics that are left that we didn't use in these ones here. And then give your own example and be creative. Have fun. All right. Laters.